It was supposed to be a happy day, my birthday. Melvin, my only son, had handed me a bottle of whiskey that morning. He smiled, though there was something in that smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and said lightly, "Just don't choke on it." "Dad," I chuckled, playing along, pretending not to notice the sharp edge in his voice. A father always notices, though he doesn't always say. But that evening, my phone lit up. A message from my grandson, Roy. His words carved through me like a cold blade. "Grandpa, don't drink the whiskey my dad gave you." He told me the terrible truth. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding louder than the ticking clock on the wall. My hands trembled, not from age, but from the storm breaking inside me. For 2 days, I carried that weight, waiting, remembering, questioning everything I thought I knew about my own blood. And then Melvin arrived. My son, my boy, who once built a treehouse with me, who once hugged me tight after skinning his knee, now sat across from me at the patio table. The bottle of whiskey gleamed amber in the sun. I poured it for him, my hand steady this time. What happened to him after that moment shattered me to the core. The photo slipped from my trembling fingers before all of it. It drifted onto the patio table like a wounded bird. There we were, frozen in time. Melvin at 12, gap-toothed and grinning, his skinny arms slung around my shoulders. Our masterpiece of wood and nails, the treehouse, rising proudly behind us. My hands weren't shaking because of arthritis. They shook because of the memory of our last conversation 3 months ago. He had looked at me with those same familiar eyes now hardened and asked, "Dad, when are you going to stop hoarding everything? You can't live surrounded by this forever." I had no answer then. I only remember the tightness in his jaw, the echo of his mother's anger, and the silence that stretched between us like an unbridgeable chasm. It was 2:30 in the afternoon, July 4th. I'd been outside for half an hour, arranging everything with a care that bordered on ritual. The patio furniture gleamed under the Ohio sun. Every chair placed exactly as Martha would have wanted. I even set out her good china, the delicate set with blue flowers she had only ever used for special occasions. Today, I told myself, was special. The grill hissed to life on my third attempt, flames leaping blue and orange. 40 years as an engineer, and I still felt a quiet pride when a machine obeyed my touch. The charcoal would need 20 minutes, time enough to fuss over the details again. I checked my phone. No messages. Not even the simplest "Happy birthday, Dad." Nothing from Melvin. My mind replayed that evening back in April after Easter dinner. He had cornered me in the kitchen, voice too calm, too deliberate. "You can't take it with you," he'd said, waving his hand at the house like it was nothing more than a vault of forgotten junk. "Ellen and we think it's time we discuss your arrangements." Arrangements. As if my life had already reached its footnote. I had pushed back, insisting I would leave the house when I was ready. His jaw had clenched, his tone sharp, and in that instant I felt like a stranger was speaking through my son's lips. On the bar cart, I arranged the bourbon glasses, heavy crystal that sang like bells when tapped. I had been saving them for a special toast, perhaps the day Melvin and I reconciled, perhaps the day I felt I had finally forgiven him. Maybe today could have been that day. My phone buzzed. For one fleeting second, my heart leapt. Maybe it was him. Maybe this was the olive branch I'd been waiting for. But no, it was a spam call, car warranties, and empty words. I let it ring into silence. The napkins were next, red, white, and blue, still crisp in their packaging. Martha had bought them last summer, eager to make the 4th of July a grand celebration. Next year, she had whispered from her hospital bed, her hand fragile in mine, "We'll make it really special." So here I was, keeping that promise alone. The outdoor speakers crackled to life, filling the yard with soft jazz. Across the fence, neighbors were already grilling their laughter, rising into the summer air. The scent of charcoal mingled with roses from Mrs. Henderson's garden. Ordinary families, ordinary joy. Families without sons who saw their fathers as burdens. I picked up another photo. Melvin again, this time in cap and gown. Wendy radiant in a yellow dress, pregnant with Roy. The pride I had felt that day was indescribable. My chest had swelled so much I thought it might burst. And now, the same son who once held my hand, who once looked at me as if I hung the moon, had given me a gift that might have ended me. And still, despite everything, despite the warning, despite the weight of betrayal, I poured that whiskey for him when he came. Because some truths only reveal themselves in the act of drinking. I had been so proud that day, standing in the crowded auditorium, watching Melvin stride across the stage to accept his computer science degree. His cap sat a little crooked, his grin wide and boyish in a way that almost broke my heart. My son, my flesh and blood. I had clapped until my palms stung, certain the whole world should see him as I did a bright, capable man about to take his first step into a shining future. He'd already secured that job at Nationwide before graduation, and I'd boasted about it to anyone who would listen. But when had it all started to slip sideways? When had the easy laughter between us turned into clipped words and silences heavy enough to drown in? The ice clinked softly against the glass pitcher as I filled it with sweet tea, Martha's recipe, the only way it was ever meant to be made, with just enough lemon to cut the sugar. Melvin used to beg for this tea every summer, back when he was still small enough to race barefoot across the lawn, his knees grass-stained, his smile unguarded. Back before degrees and mortgages and responsibilities seemed to calcify him into someone who weighed and measured everything, even it seemed his own father's worth. I checked my watch. 3:20. They would be here soon. First Ella, always punctual, then Melvin with Wendy, and young Roy tumbling in behind. I smoothed down my shirt, a crisp blue button-down Martha had bought me 2 Father's Days ago. I swore I could still catch a trace of her perfume in the fabric when I lifted the collar to my nose. Or maybe that was just my mind playing tricks, offering me comfort where none remained. The backyard looked exactly as I wanted it, festive but not desperate, welcoming but not overdone. The chairs gleamed in neat rows, the tablecloth smooth, flat, without a wrinkle, the china arranged as though Martha herself had set it. Today would be different, I told myself. Today maybe we would find our way back to each other. I was determined to make it so. A car door slammed out front, sharp against the summer air. My pulse quickened. I checked my watch again. 3:25. Too early for Melvin. I wiped my palms on my shirt, bracing myself, the gate latch cool under my hand. Here we go, I thought. The metal clicked, and there she was, Ella, stepping out of her Honda Accord, her teacher's bag slung over one shoulder, a wrapped gift tucked under her arm. Relief flooded through me. Not Melvin yet, just my daughter with her soft smile, the one she'd inherited, straight from her mother, and those watchful eyes that always seemed to see more than you wanted her to. Dad, you look good. The backyard setup. It's perfect, she said as she wrapped me in a hug. It lasted a beat longer than usual, her arms pressing into my shoulders like she was making sure I was still solid, still here. You're early, I said, trying for lightness. I was hoping it might be. Melvin's coming with Wendy and Roy closer to 4:15. She pulled back, studying my face with that quiet teacher's intuition of hers. He texted me about 20 minutes ago, she murmured. We walked side by side toward the patio, her sandals clicking rhythmically against the flagstones I had scrubbed clean just yesterday. The gift bag rustled as she set it gently on the table. Homemade, I guessed. Ella had always been that way, turning scraps into beauty, effort into meaning. Iced tea, I asked, grateful for something to do with my hands. Please. She slid into the chair nearest the house, the one that gave her the clearest view of the driveway. She immediately began twisting her wedding ring, a habit she'd picked up during the long months of her divorce. My heart ached a little at the sight. Then her voice shifted, quiet, careful. Dad, I need to talk to you about Melvin. The ice clinked again as I poured the sound too loud in the hush between us. Different how I asked, trying for nonchalance. We had that talk about the will, but that's normal. Families do that. Her lips pressed together, her brow furrowing. It's not just the will. She leaned forward, her voice dropping into the same patient tone she used with troubled students. Last week at Mom's grave, on her anniversary, he made comments, strange ones, about time running out. I handed her the glass. My fingers no longer trembled, steadied by her presence. Honey, you're reading too much into it. He's just... She cut in her eyes, locking on mine. Because last month he asked me how long people usually live after retirement. What kind of question is that, Dad? I blinked at her words, fumbling in my throat. She took a sip of tea but didn't look away. And when I mentioned your new blood pressure medication, he got interested. Too interested. He wanted to know the dosage, the side effects, whether you ever felt dizzy. Her words struck me like a dousing of ice water. My body eased into the chair opposite her, the aluminum frame creaking under my weight. I forced a laugh that sounded brittle even to my own ears. Ella, that's just him being concerned about my health. But deep inside, beneath the veneer of denial, something colder stirred. That's good, isn't it? I asked, my voice brittle, as I tried to cling to something, anything that might ease the unease crawling up my spine. Is it? Ella leaned forward, her eyes sharp, her tone urgent, but hushed like she was afraid the very air might carry her words away. Last Thursday, I stopped by their house to drop off Roy's baseball uniform. She began, her hands folding and unfolding like restless birds. Melvin was in the garage on the phone. He didn't know I was there. Dad. I heard him say something about natural causes and how no one would question it at his age. My throat went dry, the sweetness of the tea suddenly cloying heavy. Maybe it was work I managed, though my voice faltered. You know how it is, people in his line of work, they're always talking about crashes and failures. It's all technical jargon. But even as I said it, the words felt hollow. Ella shook her head, twisting her wedding ring faster and faster, the metal catching glints of late afternoon sun. No, Dad, this wasn't work. And it isn't just that. He's been asking strange questions about you, your daily routine, what time you take your pills, whether you ever drink alone in the evenings. A cold pressure tightened around my chest. And then there's the money, she continued, her voice dropping even lower, as if confessing something shameful. They're in trouble, Dad. Deep trouble. Wendy let it slip that they're behind on the mortgage. And Roy, her eyes flickered toward the driveway, as though Melvin might appear at any second. Roy needs surgery for his deviated septum. Insurance won't cover all of it. They're drowning. I opened my mouth, searching for words, but she pressed on, relentless, her fear spilling over. I think he's counting on certain things happening sooner rather than later. The jazz music humming from the speakers suddenly seemed too loud, too bright, too cheerful for the darkness settling into my bones. I wanted to defend my son, my own blood, to wave away Ella's suspicions with a laugh and an easy excuse. But then I remembered the look on Melvin's face during that Easter argument. Not just anger, something colder, a calculation, like he was already dividing the estate in his head. Ella, I said at last, my voice trembling, he's your brother. He's our family. People say things when they're stressed, things they don't mean. Her eyes brimmed, her voice cracking as she whispered, do people say things like, Dad won't be around forever, in front of their 14-year-old son? The words hit me harder than any blow. Roy told me last week, she went on, barely able to keep her voice steady, that his dad keeps talking about after Grandpa. Not someday when Grandpa's older. Not in the future. Just after. Like it's already been decided. I stared at the bourbon glasses catching the late afternoon light, their crystal edges gleaming like little knives. They were supposed to be symbols of reconciliation, of toasts and new beginnings. Now they look like props in a play whose ending I wasn't sure I wanted to see. The photo of young Melvin grinned at me from between the salt and pepper shakers, mocking me with the innocence of a boy who once begged me for sweet tea and helped me hammer boards into a crooked treehouse. Where had that boy gone? What had hardened him? Silence draped over the patio, heavy and suffocating. Both of us fiddled with our phones, though neither of us expected any message to appear. Both of us strained our ears for the sound of tires crunching gravel doors, opening, voices rising. Over the fence came the laughter of neighbors, the smell of barbecue smoke, the easy rhythm of normal families celebrating a summer afternoon, families without poisonous undercurrents snaking beneath the surface. At 4:10, sharp multiple car doors slammed in rapid succession. The sharp overlapping sounds jolted Ella upright. She stiffened, her knuckles whitening around her iced tea glass. Roy's voice rang clear, buoyant, and innocent over the fence. Grandpa. We're here. Ella's hand darted across the table, her grip like iron on my wrist. Promise me you'll be careful, Dad. Please. I patted her hand, forcing a chuckle I didn't feel. Everything's fine, sweetheart. You worry too much. But inside, my heart was hammering so hard it felt as though the neighbors might hear it thudding over the jazz. And when I stood straightening my shirt, my eyes flickered, just for a moment, back to the bourbon glasses gleaming in the sunlight. A question I dared not voice gnawed at me. Was I being paranoid, or finally paying attention? Game face on, sweetheart, I said, mustering confidence that didn't quite reach my gut. Then the gate burst open and Roy bounded in like a golden retriever pup, elbows, knees, and joy spilling in every direction. Grandpa, happy birthday. I missed you so much I caught him in a bear hug, ignoring the protest of my lower back. At 14, he was almost too big for this, but I held him tight, breathing in the warmth and love that radiated from him. His laughter rang pure, untainted, and for one precious moment I let it wash over me. This was real. The rest, the doubts, the whispers, the fear, could wait. Whatever darkness Ella feared, whatever shadows she had whispered into existence over glasses of iced tea, it hadn't touched Roy. The boy burst through the gate arms, swinging legs too long for his frame, a bundle of pure energy. "There's my favorite grandson," I said, opening my arms wide. "I'm your only grandson," he shot back with a grin, that same lopsided smile his father used to wear at 14. For an instant, my chest tightened. I saw Melvin in that grin, the boy who once asked me to help him balance a kite against the summer wind, not the man whose words now lived like a splinter in my mind. Wendy appeared next, balancing two covered casserole dishes, her sundress catching the light in soft folds. At 43, she still carried a kind of unassuming grace. Her hair swept back her presence, practical yet gentle. She kissed my cheek warmly, the faint scent of vanilla clinging to her like an old memory. "Happy birthday, Silas," she said, her voice bright. "I brought your favorite potato salad and that corn casserole you're always asking for." "You didn't need to go to such trouble, dear," I replied, though the familiar comfort of her thoughtfulness brought an ache to my throat. Wendy had always been the one to smooth rough edges, her food, her kindness, her steady laughter weaving peace where silence might otherwise reign. Then came Melvin. He stepped out from behind the BMW with slow precision, like a man measuring every inch of ground before he set his foot upon it. He held an elegantly wrapped bottle, its paper glossy, the silk ribbon catching the sun. His smile was calibrated, warm enough to pass for genuine, but hollow in the eyes. Eyes that once looked at me for guidance, now cool, calculating. "Happy birthday, Dad." Each step he took toward me seemed heavy, deliberate. He extended the gift, and when the weight shifted into my hands, I was surprised by its density, as though it carried more than glass and liquid. "I got you something special," he said. Through the tissue, I recognized the silhouette immediately. A whiskey bottle. "You didn't need to." Macallan, 25-year, the good stuff Melvin announced with that carefully performed enthusiasm people wear when they want their generosity noticed. "Cost me a fortune, but hey, you only turned 75 once, right?" My eyes lingered on the label on the dignified seal of the distillery. I knew enough about whiskey to know what it meant. $400, maybe more. The kind of gift that was either a grand gesture of love or an investment in appearances. "This is very generous, son." The words felt like stones in my mouth. He stepped closer, leaning in as though to admire the bottle. His breath brushed my ear, his voice suddenly low, intended for no one but me. "Don't choke on it." The words struck me like a blow to the chest. My grip tightened involuntarily around the bottle, the glass cold against my palms. I looked up sharply, but his face was already composed again, practiced smiling harmless. "You deserve the best, Dad. Enjoy every drop." The way he emphasized every drop sent a chill crawling down my spine. Across the table, Ella's eyes met mine. She couldn't have heard, but the concern etched in her face told me she sensed something. Her hands froze mid-gesture, the color draining from her cheeks. But then Wendy's voice broke through, cheerful and unaware. Well, she clapped her hands lightly. "Let's get this food set out. I'm starving. And I bet Roy's about to eat his own arm." The moment snapped like a brittle thread. Everyone shifted into motion. Roy fetched plates, eager to help. Wendy uncovered the dishes, releasing the scent of potatoes, rich with mayonnaise and sweet corn baked golden at the edges. Ella busied herself with serving spoons, though her eyes kept flicking between Melvin and me, worry shadowing her features. I placed the whiskey bottle at the center of the table, as though it were the crown jewel of the evening. Its wrapping gleamed under the dappled sunlight, filtering through the oak leaves, almost mocking in its elegance. For the briefest second, I caught a flicker of satisfaction cross Melvin's face. Quick, almost invisible, but it was there. "Can we eat now, Grandpa? I'm starving," Roy said, his voice bright, uncomplicated. He had his mother's practicality, his grandmother's warmth. His world was still simple food, laughter, love. No calculations, no shadows. Wendy began passing dishes, her chatter weaving ordinary comforts back into the air. Roy's baseball season, her garden club's latest project. Little anecdotes that filled silence with familiarity. Normal conversation, normal family dynamics. But beneath it, like an undercurrent, you only notice if you lean close enough, something darker coiled. And every time the sunlight caught the edges of that whiskey bottle, I felt its weight again in my hands, heavier than glass should ever be. While that whiskey bottle sat between us like a beautiful, expensive threat, I forced myself to smile. My lips stretched into the familiar curve of a host trying to keep his household intact, but my chest felt tight. I nodded at the right moments, asked Roy about his summer reading list, pretended to sip iced tea as though nothing was wrong. But inside my skull, Melvin's whispered words pulsed sharp and venomous. Don't choke on it. Not enjoy it. Not happy birthday, Dad. No, this was something else. Half warning, half promise. A dark undertone dressed in silk ribbon and premium wrapping paper. Let's celebrate, I said aloud, raising my glass of tea in a toast. My voice carried easily strong, the kind of sound a patriarch should make on his 75th birthday. But inside, another voice coiled around my thoughts and figure out what the hell just happened. The knife in my hand slid through the grilled chicken with the ease of a surgeon's blade. Juices ran onto the board, steaming in the summer air. My grip was steady enough to fool the others, but I could feel the faint betrayal in my fingers, the smallest tremor like a secret knocking to be let out. Roy held his plate under the carving board, eyes wide stomach, leading his every move. His voice cut through the tension like sunlight breaking storm clouds. Grandpa, this smells incredible. I'm starving that boy. His enthusiasm was real pure. He carried none of Ella's suspicion, none of my gnawing doubts. He was still untouched by the dark shadows grown-ups drag around with them. For a moment, I almost believed we could stay in his world of hunger and baseball, safe from poison-laced whispers and carefully wrapped bottles. Only the best for my birthday dinner, buddy. I placed the largest cut of chicken onto his plate, watching his face light up as the steam rose between us. If love could shield me, perhaps it lived in this boy's laughter. But then my gaze slid back to the bottle in the center of the table. Its elegant silhouette caught the fading sunlight, a monument not to celebration, but to some dangerous game Melvin was playing. My chest tightened. Wendy's hands moved quickly, practiced as she passed dishes around. Her cheerful chatter filled the gaps where the silence threatened to creep in. The potato salad turned out perfect. Don't you think I used your mother's recipe, Silas? Just a touch more mustard, the way she always liked it. Her words, sweet and grounding, carried Martha's memory back into the room. For an instant, I let myself imagine her here, her watchful eyes noticing everything. She would have praised Wendy's thoughtfulness, yes, but she also would have caught the frost behind Melvin's mask, the way he avoided looking anyone in the eye for too long. Roy, oblivious, devoured his food with teenage ferocity, talking between bites about baseball drills and summer reading assignments. His animated hands cut through the air, every gesture a reminder of Melvin at that same age, before calculation dulled his smile, before his eyes grew sharp with disappointment and ambition. Melvin, I ventured, voice soft, reaching across decades. Do you remember when we built your first birdhouse? You must have been 8, maybe younger. You worked so hard measuring angles, sanding edges. Every detail mattered to you. For the first time that evening, his knife paused. He looked up, his gaze sharp and unreadable. That was a long time ago, Dad. Yes, I said quickly, desperate to keep him tethered to that memory. But I can still see you at the window waiting for that first cardinal to move in. You sat there for hours, your breath fogging up the glass. You were so proud. A silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. His eyes softened for a fraction of a second, then hardened again. Things change. His voice was flat, a verdict delivered without appeal. He turned back to his plate, cutting his food with mechanical precision, as though severing himself from that boy in the memory. The air grew heavy, the kind that smothers conversation. Ella, quick to sense danger, jumped in. Roy, why don't you tell Grandpa about your science project, the renewable energy one? But Roy, true to form, had his own agenda. Grandpa, tell us about the time the bridge almost collapsed. Mom never gets the engineering details right. I tell it just fine, thank you very much, Ella protested, though relief softened her tone. Roy leaned forward, eyes shining. But you make it sound like a movie, Grandpa. Please, his eagerness cut through my unease, grounding me again. I leaned back, inhaling deeply, letting his genuine excitement anchor me to steadier ground. Well, I began, it was 1997, the Henderson Creek Bridge, just after that terrible March storm. As I spoke, the memories spilled out: steel fatigue calculations, emergency reinforcements, the race against dawn and disaster. Roy peppered me with questions, eager, bright, hungry for detail. He had the spark, the curiosity that once defined our family. Maybe it still could. But even as the words flowed, even as Roy's laughter reminded me there was still something unbroken here, I noticed Melvin. Twice he checked his phone. His indifference sharpened into something almost cruel. Wendy smiled politely, nodding, serving seconds without interrupting. Ella kept her eyes on him, cataloging every flicker of detachment, storing it away like evidence. And through it all, the whiskey bottle sat untouched in the middle of the table. A silent guest, a polished threat, a reminder that tonight was no ordinary birthday dinner. So you basically saved hundreds of people. Roy's voice carried that unmistakable adolescent awe, wide-eyed and unfiltered, the kind of admiration that made me remember exactly why I had loved my work all those years. For him, it wasn't just a story, it was proof that his grandfather was more than just an old man who grilled chicken and told bedtime tales. I did my job, kiddo. My voice came out steady, though my chest ached with old pride. That's what engineers do. We solve problems before they ever turn into disasters. The words were meant for Roy, but when my eyes flicked upward, I caught Melvin's sharp look. Something shifted in his expression, some unspoken accusation hiding behind his gaze. It was there and gone in a heartbeat, but it was enough to make my stomach twist into knots. The sun had slid lower in the sky, stretching shadows across our table, painting everything in a tired amber glow. The whiskey bottle in the center caught the last light differently now, its cut glass surface splintering the sunset into fractured rainbows across the white tablecloth. Beautiful, yes, but unsettling too, like a warning cloaked in elegance. That bottle wasn't just whiskey anymore. It was Melvin's move in a game I hadn't agreed to play. Can I have some of that special whiskey, Grandpa, just a tiny sip, for your birthday? Roy's innocent question hit the table like shattering glass. His bright eyes held nothing but curiosity and longing. But I felt the air shift. My hand moved automatically toward the bottle before I saw it, the way Melvin's gaze snapped to me, sharp and watchful, predatory in its intensity. I froze mid-motion, the weight of his silent challenge pressing into me. Maybe when you're older, buddy, I managed. My voice sounded strained, thinner than I wanted. Roy slumped back with a small, disappointed sigh. Melvin's expression eased almost imperceptibly, satisfaction flickering across his face like a predator relaxing once its prey had backed away. Ella stood abruptly, the scrape of her chair too loud in the hushed tension. Well, this was lovely. But we should probably— You don't need to clean up, honey, I protested but weakly. My daughter was already gathering plates, moving with the sharp efficiency of someone who needed the distraction. She stacked dishes in neat towers, her motions precise, purposeful, each clink of porcelain, a shield against the emotions she didn't want to feel. It's no trouble, Dad, she said without looking at me. Besides, many hands make light work. Roy groaned dramatically, pushing his chair back. Do we have to leave already? I don't want to go yet. Can I sleep over? Please, Grandpa. His pleading tone nearly broke me. The hope shining in his voice was a knife wrapped in sweetness. Next time, buddy. Maybe next weekend, if your parents say yes. I ruffled his hair, memorizing the texture beneath my palm, holding on to the small moment like it was a lifeline. I'll even make those chocolate chip pancakes you love. Promise. His face lit up, a spark of joy piercing through the heavy air. Promise. And we can watch old movies too. I'll bring my sleeping bag. Promise, I said again, though the word carried a weight I couldn't quite name. Wendy moved quietly around the room, tucking away leftovers, wrapping cake in foil, gathering her casserole dishes. Silas, thank you for such a wonderful evening. The grilling was perfect, and that corn salad. She smiled, polite but weary, just the way Martha used to make it. It was nothing special, I murmured, just family time. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't true. Tonight had been special in the way a cracked mirror is special. It had revealed everything: the fractures in our family, the distance we all danced around, the way closeness now had to be carefully staged like a fragile performance. We carried the remnants of celebration out to the front yard together. Leftover food gift bags, dishes clinking, softly laughter that didn't quite reach the heart. Roy dragged his feet, clinging to me with last-minute pleas while the adults gathered coats and keys with the practiced precision of people eager to escape. Outside, the air was cooler, sharp with the smell of early fireworks popping faintly from neighboring streets. Wendy loaded her dishes into the BMW's trunk. Roy climbed reluctantly into the back seat, still pressing his hand against the window to wave at me, his face full of warmth I didn't deserve. "Thanks for dinner, Dad." Melvin's voice was flat, stripped of affection, a transaction completed. He extended his hand instead of his arms. I reached for a hug out of instinct, but his palm was already there, dry and firm, forcing me into the brief perfunctory shake. "We'll see you soon." "Son," I said quietly, my heart thudding heavy. "I hope we can talk more next time. Really talk. About everything." "Sure. Whatever." He was already turning away, slipping into the driver's seat, eager to put distance between us. The door slammed shut like a final word, leaving me standing in the twilight with my hand half raised, the fractured rainbows of the whiskey bottle still burning in my mind. Ella lingered by the doorway, her keys trembling faintly in her hand, the metallic jingle betraying nerves she tried to mask with a smile. "Dad, call me tomorrow, okay? Just to check in." Her voice was gentle, but there was an urgency under it, a note of worry that felt heavier than the words themselves. I forced a lightness into my tone, the kind fathers use when they want to spare their daughters unnecessary fear. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Stop worrying about your old man. I've survived worse than a birthday dinner." But her eyes told me she wasn't convinced. And maybe that was what unnerved me most, not her words, but the way her concern was starting to feel like prophecy, not paranoia. "I can't help it," she said softly, almost to herself. "That's what daughters do." She stepped into my arms, then hugging me tighter than usual, her face pressed firmly against my shoulder. It wasn't just affection. It was as if she was imprinting the moment, holding on a little longer than she normally would, as though she knew she might need the memory later. When she finally pulled back, her eyes glistened with unshed tears that caught in the porch light. "I love you. You know that. I love you too, baby girl. Always. Drive safe." She nodded, swallowed, then slipped away into the night. Two cars pulled from my curb in succession. Melvin's BMW roared off first, vanishing around the corner, without a backward glance, cold and final. Ella's Honda followed more slowly, headlights gliding down the street. I saw her hand lift in one last wave through the driver's window, the faint gesture lingering until darkness swallowed both vehicles whole. And then I was alone. The silence settled thick and immediate, rushing in to fill the space they'd left behind. My porch light cast a pale yellow circle around my feet, anchoring me in the emptiness of my yard. The laughter and conversation of the evening already felt like a memory, distant, fragile, unreal. Inside the house bore the aftermath of family time. Dirty plates slouched beside the sink, serving spoons abandoned mid-thought across the counter, scraps of dinner left as if no one had truly wanted to finish. And there, still sitting at the heart of the mess, was the whiskey bottle. Macallan, 25 years. The kind of whiskey that wasn't just bought, it was chosen. Wrapped in elegant packaging, the bottle had seemed like an extravagant gift when Melvin first set it on my table. But now, in the harsh kitchen light, it mocked me. All that expensive presentation, all that crystal and polish, for what? A dinner that hadn't healed, but widened the cracks between us. I picked it up, feeling its cold weight in my hands. The label, the craftsmanship, the luxury of it all, it reeked of intention. Either an outrageously generous gesture or an expensively calculated move. Maybe one glass wouldn't hurt. It was my birthday after all. If tonight had proven anything, it was that reconciliation was a fool's hope. Sometimes a man just needed a drink strong enough to blur the sharp edges of disappointment. I reached for a clean glass from the cabinet. My hand hovered. That was when my phone buzzed. The vibration startled me. In the quiet, the screen lighting up against the dark granite counter. I set the glass back down, expecting a belated birthday message from a neighbor, maybe an old colleague. But then I saw the name, Roy, and beneath it words that froze my blood where I stood. "Grandpa, don't drink the whiskey Dad gave you." I blinked. Read it again, and again. By the third time, the meaning struck hard and merciless, knocking the air from my chest. My fingers fumbled as I typed back. What? Why would you say that? The reply came almost instantly with a lightning speed only teenagers possessed. I saw him put something in it. Something bad. I wasn't supposed to see, but I did. The room tilted around me. The kitchen blurred, the air thickened. My hands shot out to grip the counter knuckles white against the polished stone. What do you mean, something bad? What did you see exactly? Three dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Roy was typing, stopping retyping his own panic bleeding through the screen. Finally, the words arrived, jagged and raw. He had a little bottle. He poured stuff in, then he shook it up. I asked what he was doing, and he got really mad and said, "Never mind." My knees buckled. I sank into the nearest chair phone, trembling in my hands. Across the kitchen, the whiskey bottle gleamed under the overhead lights, its crystal surface fractured into shards of reflected brightness, an accusation in glass form. I forced my thumbs to move, though they felt clumsy foreign. "Thank you for telling me. Delete these messages right now. Don't let anyone see them." The reply was immediate. "Already doing it." "Are you okay, Grandpa? I was so scared." Scared. The word echoed in me like a tolling bell. My grandson, 14 years old, still a boy, had carried this horror inside him all evening. He had sat through dinner with it lodged in his chest, torn between loyalty to his father and the terrifying knowledge of what his father had done. And now here he was, choosing me, choosing truth, at the cost of everything. The phone slipped lower in my lap as I stared at the bottle across the kitchen. My birthday gift, my death sentence, and Melvin's eyes, watchful, calculating, flashed back to me. The courage it must have taken for Roy to finally send that warning. I could hardly fathom it. My fingers trembled as I read his message again, the words blurring for a moment through the sting in my eyes. A boy of 14 carrying a secret that could shatter his family, yet he still found the strength to save me. My heart felt heavy, but it beat with a new rhythm, gratitude mixed with grief. "I'm okay now, thanks to you. You're a brave boy. This stays between us." I forced steadiness into my words, though inside I was crumbling. It felt like an earthquake had torn through my chest, shaking loose everything I thought I knew about my own blood. Then his reply, "I love you, Grandpa." 4 words. Simple, innocent, but they struck harder than any blow. Harder than Melvin's betrayal. Harder than all the years of quiet disappointments I had ignored. "I love you too, son. More than you know." My thumb hovered over the screen before I set the phone down, unable to bear its glow any longer. I lifted my eyes to the kitchen counter where Melvin's gift still waited. The bottle, once elegant and regal, had transformed into something sinister. Its sleek packaging, which had earlier looked celebratory, now seemed like funeral attire, polished wrapping over hidden death. My son, my own flesh and blood. He had tried to poison me on my 75th birthday, in front of his child. The realization pressed in on me until the kitchen walls themselves seemed to lean closer, suffocating as if the house could no longer contain such betrayal. I staggered into the living room, desperate for space air, anything to help me think. I collapsed into Martha's old reading chair, the one with the faded floral upholstery she had insisted on keeping, despite my offers to replace it. She would have known what to do. She always saw through people, even when I didn't, especially when it came to Melvin. Now every moment from dinner replayed in my mind with a cruel new clarity. Melvin's sharp, watchful eyes as I reached for the bottle. The way he'd smiled when he urged enjoy every drop. His voice laced with something I had dismissed as bitterness, now revealed as venom. And that final phrase, "don't choke on it." Not a joke, not a careless quip, but a calculated hint, a promise of what he expected to happen once I drank alone, no witnesses, no suspicion. Just an old man gone suddenly from a heart attack. Convenient. Clean. I pressed my hand to my face, shame washing over me. How blind had I been? How long had Melvin's resentment curdled into this? Was it money, the inheritance he thought he deserved? Or had he carried hatred so deep it no longer needed a reason? And what kind of poison had he used? Something untraceable. Something that would mimic the heart giving out I pictured him at my funeral. His crocodile tears his hand on Ella's shoulder, while inside he celebrated the freedom of my absence and the weight of my estate falling into his hands. The whiskey bottle sat in the kitchen like a viper coiled in crystal. Beautiful, expensive, deadly. Everything about Melvin distilled into one object I should have seen for what it was all along. Beside me, my phone lay silent. Roy's messages already erased, gone like footprints washed from sand. My grandson had risked everything, his father's rage, his family's wrath, just to save me. His small act of courage shone brighter than anything Melvin had ever done. I whispered into the empty house, my voice breaking. What am I going to do now? No answer came. Only the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the old house settling. My 75th birthday, the day I learned my son wanted me dead. And the only hand reaching out to pull me back from the edge belonged to a 14-year-old boy caught in an impossible choice. Slowly I rose. My knees cracked my body, reminding me of its years, but my mind was sharper now than it had been in decades. I walked back into the kitchen, each step heavier than the last. The whiskey bottle seemed to glow with malevolence, under the light pulsing like it carried a heartbeat of its own. No longer a gift, no longer a symbol of celebration. It was evidence. Cold, damning evidence. I picked it up carefully, cradling it as though it might explode in my hands. I lifted it toward the light, the amber liquid gleaming, beautiful and treacherous. How many dollars had Melvin spent on this? 400 more, a fortune for a working man? But the price was not measured in money. It was measured in whatever remained of his soul. Sleep never came that night. I sat in Martha's chair staring at that bottle, listening to the echo of Roy's warning repeating in my mind like scripture. By dawn, the decision was clear. At 8 o'clock sharp, I was already dressed, jacket, pressed shoes, polished as if preparing for battle. I packed a mason jar, sealing a sample of the liquid inside. Proof. Evidence. The engineer in me demanded facts before I let my heart write its verdict. The Ohio Forensic Lab loomed downtown, a building of glass and steel, sterile and sharp, the kind of place I used to present my analyses to men who never quite trusted the numbers. The automatic doors slid open with a hush, and I stepped inside carrying death in a jar, my heart thundering as if every beat whispered the same truth: my son wants me gone. But I am still here. What type of analysis are you requesting, Mr. Mills? The technician's voice was calm, almost soothing, as if she dealt with requests far stranger than a 75-year-old man asking for poison detection on a bottle of whiskey. She couldn't possibly know the earthquake churning beneath my ribs. Her eyes, gentle, kind, but edged with professional distance, met mine steadily, betraying neither shock nor judgment. I need to know if anything has been added to this whiskey that shouldn't be there. I placed the mason jar on the counter with more care than I'd once placed steel beams on blueprints. My voice tried to sound steady, but my hands betrayed me, trembling with the weight of the truth I feared. Suspected adulteration, I added the words, catching in my throat. She nodded briskly. We'll run a full toxicology screen. Should have results in about 3 hours. 3 hours, an eternity compressed into a sentence. I filled out their forms with the same meticulous precision I'd once used to draft engineering specifications. Every detail documented: chain of custody, my contact information, payment authorization. It wasn't just paperwork. It was the skeleton of what could soon become legal evidence that my only son had tried to kill me. The waiting room was a purgatory of worn chairs, outdated magazines, and stale coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink. Time stretched. I rehearsed imaginary conversations with lawyers, police officers, even Melvin himself. Part of me still clung desperately to the hope that Roy had misunderstood, that there was some innocent explanation, however improbable. A boy's imagination, perhaps, or a trick of perspective. Anything but the truth I dreaded. When the technician reappeared calling my name, her voice cut through my spiraling thoughts like a scalpel. Mr. Mills, we have your results. My legs felt heavier than steel beams as I followed her into a small consultation room. Computer monitors glowed with charts and data I couldn't decipher. She sat behind her desk opening a manila folder, her face professional but shadowed with concern. We found a sedative compound in your sample, she said, her tone measured, specifically a benzodiazepine derivative. The concentration is approximately 15 milligrams per fluid ounce. My chest constricted. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. How dangerous is that? Her eyes softened. For someone your age, consuming it regularly, very serious. We're talking about respiratory depression, cardiac irregularities, significant cognitive impairment. She hesitated before continuing, as if weighing how much truth I could bear. May I ask how you came to suspect contamination? I ignored the question, my mind needing cold medical facts, not human curiosity. What would happen if someone drank it regularly? Say, a glass each evening. She exhaled slowly. Gradual onset, confusion, dizziness, breathing difficulties, symptoms that might easily be mistaken for natural aging. Her pause lasted too long. Then quietly, eventually, yes. This concentration could be fatal, especially for someone elderly with underlying health issues. Fatal. The word didn't just echo, it settled like lead in my lungs. My son hadn't simply slipped poison into an expensive bottle. He had engineered a weapon that would kill me slowly and visibly while letting him play the role of grieving son. I'll need official documentation of these findings. I said, my engineering instincts locking into place. No emotions, no panic, just the demand for evidence, for proof. She obliged, printing a detailed report on official letterhead charts and measurements filling each page. I read it twice, every word searing into me while already imagining a lawyer's office, a courtroom, the unbearable truth laid bare under oath. The drive home blurred past me. The radio was on, but I couldn't hear it. The sealed envelope on the passenger seat might as well have been a live bomb. Roy's desperate warning had saved my life, but this document transformed whispers and suspicion into hard clinical truth. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat in the cooling car for several long minutes just staring at that envelope. 45 years of raising Melvin, of late nights and sacrifices of birthday parties and scraped knees and second chances, and this was where it had led. Not to pride or legacy, but to lab results proving that my own flesh and blood wanted me dead. I whispered into the silence of the car, barely able to hear my own voice. Why, Melvin, after everything? Why? The only answer was the crinkle of the envelope in my shaking hands. Time to understand exactly what his betrayal had cost us both. By 3:00 p.m., my living room no longer resembled the comfortable sanctuary Martha and I had built. Instead, it looked like the command center of a forensic accountant. The coffee table sagged beneath the weight of old photo albums, manila folders swollen with receipts, canceled checks, contracts, loan agreements, all preserved with the methodical care of a man who once believed family investments mattered. For 3 hours after returning from the lab, I had been on my knees and elbows, pulling evidence from every hidden corner of this house. Desk drawers rifled through closets, unboxed, dusty binders dragged from shelves. Each piece I laid down wasn't just paper, it was proof, a ledger of sacrifice, a chronology of unconditional support that stretched back decades, line after line, year after year, until the sheer weight of it pressed like lead against my chest. The university folder was thickest: Ohio State, engineering tuition, 2001 through 2005. Each semester paid in full, no student loans, no compromises. My overtime shifts at the plant had bought those credits. The cost was brutal on my salary, $127,000 in all, but I had paid it gladly, dollar for dollar, because I believed education was the best inheritance I could give my son. The receipts were all there, right down to the last reimbursement for a textbook. I found the photograph tucked inside, worn at the corners, Melvin's graduation day. We stood shoulder to shoulder in the May sunshine, his cap tilted at a careless angle, my own face shining with pride. I could almost hear the laughter and applause again, taste the lump in my throat as I watched him cross that stage. Summa cum laude, I whispered into the silence, my voice breaking. I was so proud I nearly cried right there in front of everyone. Next came the mortgage documents. August 2008. The market had just crashed, first-time buyers were floundering, and banks were tightening every rule. Melvin would have lost that colonial on Maple Street if not for me. $32,000 pulled straight from my savings, the signature line showing me not only as donor, but as cosigner. I traced my own handwriting on the paper. His voice echoed in my head, as clear as if he were standing beside me now. Just until I get established, Dad. I'll pay you back within 2 years, I promise. 15 years had passed since that vow evaporated like morning fog. The debt was never spoken of again, the promise never revisited. Only silence remained. Then the credit card statements from 2015. The year his first marriage collapsed, leaving him shattered financially, emotionally, spiritually. 6 months of mortgage payments I covered so he wouldn't lose the house. Therapy bills I paid so he wouldn't lose himself. $18,000 just like that drained away because I couldn't stand to see him drowning. The networking folder was harder to measure in dollars, but perhaps more valuable than all the rest. Recommendation letters I'd written on his behalf. Phone calls I'd made to colleagues whose trust I'd earned across decades of honest work. Introductions at professional conferences where my reputation carried more weight than his resume ever could. I thought of Frank Hartley, how he'd hired Melvin not because of his merit, but because Frank trusted my judgment about character. That irony burned now like acid. I had staked my good name for a man who in secret was sharpening the knife against me. And then the most recent rescues. The cryptocurrency disaster, $15,000 lost in a foolish gamble. Credit cards maxed out me, quietly bailing him out again. The failed startup last year, another $8,000 swallowed into nothing. Promises of revolutionary returns, all smoke and mirrors, all hollow. I scribbled rough totals on a legal pad, my pen carving grooves into the paper. Education, $127,000, $9,000 housing, $32,000, down our marriage collapse rescue, $18,000, crypto and startup disasters, $23,000, career favors, incalculable, emotional labor, immeasurable, over $200 and $100,000 in hard currency, and a lifetime of intangible support, guidance, protection, love that no ledger could ever capture. Every birthday party where I'd played the generous patriarch. Every Christmas morning when I'd insisted on tradition, family togetherness. Every hour spent babysitting Roy, not as a chore, but as a joy, a privilege of grandfatherhood. Every smile, every story, every piece of my heart I had given freely. Now it all felt poisoned, tainted. Each memory I touched seemed to sour, overlaid with the knowledge that while I poured myself out for him, he was silently measuring the days until my funeral. The lab report sat at the top of this growing mountain of evidence, like an exhibit in a courtroom, scientific, cold, undeniable. A son's betrayal captured in chemical compounds and milligram measurements. Proof that paternal love had been repaid, not with gratitude, but with attempted murder. I arranged the documents carefully in chronological order, not out of neatness, but out of necessity. A case was forming. A case any reasonable person could not deny. A case that might one day decide whether justice would be done or whether this betrayal would be buried under silence. Martha's photo smiled down at me from the mantel, her gentle eyes carrying that familiar mix of warmth and wisdom that had guided me through so much of life. But tonight her expression seemed to hold something else, an unspoken question. How had I failed to see the warning signs? How had our boy, the child we had raised with such care, grown into a man who could measure human worth in dollars, who could quietly accept decades of unconditional support while plotting such cold betrayal? I reached for my leather-bound appointment book, its pages heavy with the weight of years spent recording life's duties and milestones. My fingers stopped at April, then slowed as they brushed over the neat black ink of my own handwriting. April 23, 2025. The entry read, "Family meeting discuss will and estate planning. Melvin requested urgent discussion." That was it. That was the pivot point, the quiet crack that widened into the chasm where we now stood. That conversation had been the seed from which all of this had sprouted. I could still see it clearly. Melvin's face across this very room, his practiced calm, the edge beneath his words. What I had mistaken as urgency for family planning had really been something darker, something coiled and hungry. That's when it began. I whispered into the silence, staring at the page as though the ink itself were accusing me. The memory unspooled with such clarity, it was as if I'd been pulled back to that spring afternoon. The windows had been open, letting in the fragrant breath of lilacs, the promise of another season Martha would have loved. I'd still believed then that family problems could be solved the old-fashioned way, through patience, conversation, and compromise. I hadn't yet learned that love could be weaponized, or that my own son was willing to twist it for his gain. Melvin had shown up 20 minutes early that day, an event so unusual for him it should have rung bells in my head. This was the boy who'd been perpetually late to Sunday dinners, the man who breezed into Christmas mornings halfway through breakfast. But not that afternoon. That afternoon, he'd worn his navy suit, the one Wendy had bought him for big presentations, and carried himself with the taut posture of a man preparing for battle. "Dad, thanks for making time for this," he had said, his hand clasping mine with a firmness that felt rehearsed. The dampness of his palm betrayed his nerves. His tone was steady, careful, almost professional, like he was addressing a boardroom instead of his own father. I know estate planning isn't the most comfortable topic. We'd settled into our places, he on the sofa, I in Martha's reading chair, the very chair I sat in now, with my heart splitting open under the weight of hindsight. Around us, the living room had felt timeless. Martha's touches everywhere, the floral curtains, the faint scent of her lavender sachets lingering in the air. If ghosts exist, she had been there too, listening, watching. For 15 minutes, we danced around safe subjects: Roy's baseball season, Wendy's garden club, his latest projects at work. I remember the relief I'd felt then, thinking perhaps this would simply be a cordial check-in, a son showing unusual initiative. But then I saw it happen. His shoulders squared, his jaw set, his eyes sharpened like a soldier bracing for a charge. "Dad, we need to talk about your will." The words had landed like a stone thrown into still water. "What about it?" "Everything's handled through Morrison and Associates. Your mother and I set it up properly years ago," I'd answered, puzzled but not alarmed. I'd trusted the planning Martha and I had done, trusted the fairness of it. "That's just it," he'd said, leaning forward, his voice taking on that calculated tone people use when they're stepping onto dangerous ground. "I think it needs updating. Modern estate planning. Tax implications have changed since Mom died. I should have seen it then, the manipulation, the careful staging of concern. But instead, I'd heard only the surface, not the undertow beneath it. The will splits everything equally between you and Ella." "That seemed fair to both your mother and me," I told him. It had been true. Equal shares for both children, because fairness was the cornerstone of everything Martha and I believed about parenting. But Melvin's face had tightened. His eyes, so much like Martha's, but stripped of her warmth, had flickered with something raw. "Circumstances have changed, Dad. I'm facing some financial challenges right now. Serious challenges." That startled me more than I'd let on. Melvin had always cultivated an image of success. Newer cars than I ever owned. Family vacations to expensive resorts. Designer suits. He'd crafted the facade so carefully that even I had started to believe it. "How serious?" I'd asked slowly. "What happened to your job security?" "The job's fine," he'd replied, too quickly, too flatly. And even then, God help me. I'd leaned forward, more concerned for him than suspicious of him. My instinct had still been to help, to protect, to fix. And maybe that was my greatest failing. "It's investments." Melvin had said, his voice low, brittle, the kind of tone a man uses when he knows shame is closing in. "Cryptocurrencies, some business ventures that went bad." He hadn't looked at me when he confessed it, not once. His eyes had fixed instead on his hands clenched tightly in his lap, the way a child might clasp them when waiting to be scolded. "I'm about 47,000 in debt," he muttered. "Maybe more." 47,000. The number landed like a steel weight against my chest. My breath stalled, my stomach clenched. But before anger could even surface, something older, deeper, more instinctual kicked in, my parental reflex to fix, to shelter, to protect. "Son," I said softly, leaning forward, "we can work through this. There are debt consolidation programs, refinancing options. Maybe I can cover some of the immediate pressure, just enough to—" He cut me off, and the edge in his voice was like glass. "That's not enough, Dad. I need you to change the will. Give me a larger share of the inheritance." The interruption wasn't a plea, it was a demand. I heard it in the hardness of his words, in the way his desperation had curdled into entitlement. "She doesn't need it like I do," he went on quickly, almost spitting the words out. "Ella has her pension, her alimony, no real debts. She's fine, Dad. She'll always be fine. I'm the one drowning here." My hands tightened against the arms of Martha's old chair. "That's not how family inheritance works, Melvin." I said, my voice steady but firm. "Your mother wanted equal treatment. She believed in fairness always, and so do I." His jaw clenched, his eyes flashing in a way that reminded me of a cornered animal. "You've always favored her." He snapped, the bitterness rising like bile. "The perfect daughter with her perfect career, her perfect choices, never needing help. never making mistakes. That's not true and you know it, I said sharply, heat rising in my chest. I've supported both of you equally. Every time you needed me, I was there. Supported? He scoffed, leaning forward, now his voice dropping into something darker, more primal. Dad, I'm your son. I carry the Mills family name. I should inherit the house. I should inherit most of your assets. It's my birthright. The arrogance in his tone staggered me. This wasn't desperation anymore. This was entitlement dressed as tradition, selfishness wrapped in the language of legacy. You'll inherit fairly when the time comes, I said firmly. But that time hasn't come yet. You'll get what's yours when it happens naturally. Anna. Melvin's expression hardened, his mask slipping completely. His next words were poison. When will that be, Dad? When you're 90, 100? His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. I'm saying maybe it's time you considered that I need this money now, not in some distant hypothetical future. The room went still. The only sound was the furious pounding of my heart in my ears. For a long, frozen second, I couldn't speak. My own son had just reduced my existence to an obstacle, an inconvenience delaying his payday. He had as good as told me that I was living too long. Get out, I said finally, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. The words came from a place deep inside me, some cavern of hurt I hadn't known existed until that moment. Get out of my house. He left without another word, the slam of the front door shaking the windows in their frames. The sound echoed long after he was gone, a violent punctuation mark at the end of a conversation that had rewritten everything I thought I knew about my son. I had stood in that very room afterward, staring at Martha's chair at her picture on the mantel, asking the empty air where I had failed him. How had I raised a man capable of turning his father's mortality into a bargaining chip? Now, months later, I closed the appointment book with finality. That night hadn't been the end. It had been the beginning. When persuasion failed, Melvin had escalated. He'd shifted from manipulation to something far darker, from words to murder. This is where it started, I murmured to the silence around me. And this is where it will end. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the contacts until my thumb stopped at Morrison and Associates. My chest tightened, but my hand was steady. Time to make changes to my will, not the changes Melvin had demanded, but the ones that would finally cut him out of the family's future. The office building downtown was one I knew well. 15th floor, mahogany-paneled conference rooms, the scent of leather chairs and old paper lingering in the air. I had climbed those stairs for more than 15 years, planning retirement, adjusting investments, working through the painful paperwork of Martha's passing. But never like this. Never carrying evidence that my own son had tried to end me. Margaret Morrison rose as I entered, her silver hair, immaculate, her presence as steady and professional as always. She'd been there through every major turn of my family's financial life. Silas, she said, concern etched across her face. What's so urgent it couldn't wait until Monday? Her kindness nearly undid me. I had never once asked her for an after-hours appointment. Not until tonight, when the future of my family depended on what I was about to say. I placed the manila envelope on Margaret Morrison's polished mahogany conference table with deliberate care, as though the weight inside could shatter the room if dropped too harshly. My hand lingered on its surface for a moment before I spoke, my voice steady, but carrying the gravity of a man forced to say something no father should ever have to say. My son tried to poison me, I said, and I have proof. Margaret's composure was remarkable. She didn't gasp, didn't lean back in shock. She was a woman who had handled messy divorces, disputed inheritances, and decades of family scandals. Still, her eyebrows arched ever so slightly, a flicker of human surprise, breaking through her professional calm. That is a very serious accusation, Silas, she replied softly. What kind of proof do you have? I drew the first document from the envelope and slid it across the table toward her. The letterhead caught the lamplight, Ohio Forensic Laboratory. The pages rustled like a verdict as I spread them out between us. The whiskey, I said, my throat tight. The bottle Melvin gave me for my 75th birthday. I sent it for testing. They found benzodiazepine derivatives dissolved carefully, mixed in a way that wouldn't alter the taste. Enough to sedate me gradually. Enough to kill me if I kept drinking it over time. Margaret adjusted her glasses and leaned closer, her eyes scanning the technical analysis with the meticulous attention that had made her the most respected estate attorney in Columbus. Her fingers moved slowly along the print lips, tightening as she read. "This shows deliberate adulteration," she murmured. "The concentration levels. Silas, this isn't an accident. Someone prepared this to weaken you, possibly even end your life." Her words sliced through the silence like a scalpel. I reached for the next stack of documents, the financial records, the years of checks written, mortgages, refinanced tuition, paid debts quietly erased. I fanned them out in front of her. "Decades of support," I said bitterly. "Hundreds of thousands of dollars. I gave him everything I could. And this is how he repays me." Margaret looked up at me, then her expression no longer the detached professionalism of a lawyer, but the quiet sorrow of a woman seeing the tragedy of a family collapsing in on itself. "Have you contacted the police?" she asked carefully. "Not yet." I shook my head. "I will. But first I need to protect my grandson." And there it was, the image that had haunted me day and night. Roy's face, his bright, hopeful eyes filled with the innocence his father had long since lost. That boy, my grandson, had risked everything to save me. He didn't deserve to be dragged down by Melvin's greed or Wendy's manipulations. "Everything goes to Roy," I continued firmly. "Not to Melvin, not to Wendy. I want it all locked away in an irrevocable trust. Education, security, independence. He will never need to rely on his parents' chaos. He deserves better than the shadows they've cast." Margaret leaned back in her leather chair, exhaling slowly as she weighed the magnitude of what I was asking. "That's a significant change from your current," Will, she said at last. "Are you absolutely certain about completely disinheriting Melvin?" I met her gaze without hesitation. My voice was like iron. "He forfeited his inheritance the moment he tried to murder his father." The words came out flat, stripped of emotion. To me, this was no longer about grief or anger. It was an engineering problem, and it required an engineering solution. "I want Roy protected," I added. "Completely. No loopholes, no ways for his parents to touch a cent of it, even as guardians." Margaret nodded, already pulling precedent cases onto her screen, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced precision. "We'll set the trust with strict provisions," she explained. "Roy will be the sole beneficiary. Educational priorities first. No access until he's 25. Trustees appointed outside the family. That way, even if something were to happen to you, neither Melvin nor Wendy could interfere." "Good," I said. "Make it bulletproof." For the next hour, the office filled with the quiet rhythm of legal architecture being built, keystrokes, pages, turning, the hum of the printer warming up. I watched as my instincts as a father transformed into a black and white law, a fortress of words and clauses designed to keep my grandson safe. When the documents finally emerged from the printer, page after page of destiny, printed in crisp black ink, I felt my chest tighten. Margaret summoned 2 members of the evening security staff as witnesses. They signed their pens, scratching across the paper with a solemnity that matched the gravity of the moment. Then it was my turn. My signature felt heavier than any I had ever written. Each pen stroke carried years of love for Roy, disappointment in Melvin, and the finality of severing blood ties in ink. Each signature was a declaration betrayal had consequences. Margaret notarized the stack with her embossed seal, pressing the raised stamp into permanence. "You know," she said quietly as she gathered the documents, "you could still pursue criminal charges. Attempted poisoning is a felony." "I'm considering it," I admitted, "but my first duty is to Roy. He shouldn't suffer for his father's sins." I gathered the certified copies into the envelope, now transformed from evidence of betrayal into proof of justice. "This structure protects him completely," Margaret reassured me. "Even in the worst case, Melvin and Wendy will never touch a dime of it." I rose and she extended her hand. Our handshake wasn't just a closing formality. It felt like a pact with something larger than both of us. A pact with justice itself. I walked out of that office lighter, though not unscarred. My son had tried to end me, but instead I had turned his treachery into a safeguard. What he meant for destruction, I had reshaped into hope. Melvin's attempted murder had become Roy's inheritance, his education, his independence, his future. And as I stepped into the cool night air of downtown Columbus, I knew this: my grandson would grow up free, shielded by the law I had signed tonight. And Melvin, he had written himself out of the family legacy with his own greed. Downtown Columbus shimmered under the cloak of evening, the glass towers catching the last remnants of twilight, before surrendering fully to electric light. I guided the car through familiar streets, the certified copies of my new will, resting on the passenger seat like silent companions. Companions I had chosen over blood, over kin, over the son who had betrayed me. They seemed to radiate a gravity of their own more than mere paper. They were proof of a severed bond of love turned into legal steel. At a red light, I reached for my phone. Melvin's name stared up at me from the screen, glowing faintly like a ghost waiting to be summoned. My thumb hovered above the call button, rehearsing the words that had echoed through my mind all day. "Son, we need to talk about your inheritance. Can you come over tomorrow evening?" But the light turned green before I pressed down. My foot hit the accelerator and I slipped the phone back into my jacket pocket. No, this conversation demanded more than a rushed exchange between traffic lights. It needed control precision. It needed the stage set perfectly. By Sunday afternoon, the house had become my theater. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, spilling gold across the tiled floor, as I rehearsed the most important performance of my 75 years. Every detail mattered. Every syllable had to be deliberate. For the first time since Roy's trembling warning text, I'd slept peacefully the night before. Legal protection had brought with it a quiet strength, the reassurance that my grandson's future was locked behind walls my son could never breach. That peace allowed me to focus entirely on the task ahead, not on fear, but on justice. When I finally picked up the phone, my hand did not tremble. "Melvin, it's Dad. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" His voice crackled through the line, carrying something I hadn't heard in weeks, cautious hope. "Sure. What's up?" I drew in a breath, letting silence stretch just long enough to set the hook. "I've been thinking about our conversation back in April. About the will." A pause on his end. Then, "Oh, what about it?" I think I said, slowly, carefully. "You might have been right about some things. We should discuss it face to face." The change in his tone was immediate. The false restraint cracked, and excitement rushed in like a flood. "Really? You've changed your mind about the inheritance split?" "Let's just say," I replied, forcing the lie out like poison on my tongue, "I've had time to reconsider your perspective on fairness." He laughed softly, a greedy chuckle that made my skin crawl. "This sounds promising, Dad. When do you want to meet?" "Can you come over this evening around 7? "Absolutely." "Should I bring Wendy and Roy?" I clenched my jaw before answering. "No. This should be just between us. Father and son business." Roy did not need to see what was about to unfold. He had already borne enough. "Perfect," Melvin said, his voice practically humming with satisfaction. "I'll be there at 7 sharp." When the call ended, I remained standing in my quiet kitchen, listening to the faint tick of the wall clock. The house felt alive, its walls whispering the gravity of what was to come. Melvin believed his patience had been rewarded. He thought his scheme was finally bearing fruit. He had no idea he was walking straight into a trap designed by a man who had spent 40 years solving impossible problems with engineering precision. On the counter sat the whiskey bottle, his weapon, his evidence, his undoing. I uncorked it slowly, poured its amber poison down the sink, and watched it swirl away in a spiral of expensive death. Hot soapy water followed, scrubbing the glass clean. Again and again I rinsed it until no trace of the sedatives remained. Then from my collection I chose an identical bottle. Same brand, same age, the same deep honeyed color that would fool even the most watchful eye. I measured the refill carefully down to the precise liquid level, adjusting under each kind of light. The cold glare of the kitchen fluorescents, the warm glow of living room lamps, the honest sunlight through the windows. Every angle, every shadow had to be perfect. The living room became a stage, chairs positioned exactly opposite one another. The coffee table cleared, the whiskey bottle placed at its center like the crown jewel of deception. Nearby, but just out of sight, lay the lab report, the hammer that would fall at the perfect moment. And then came the rehearsal. My words, my pauses, the flicker of my hand, reaching for the bottle, the steady weight of my gaze as I slid a glass toward him. I imagined his eagerness as he lifted it, certain the poison still lingered within. I envisioned the flicker of triumph in his eyes giving way to confusion, then fear, then realization as I revealed the switch. Every movement was mapped, every breath measured. This was not improvisation. This was the careful construction of justice. A father preparing not only to expose his son, but to end the illusion of family ties once and for all. Watch his reaction when he thinks it's still poisoned, I whispered into the silence of my house, my own voice echoing back at me like the lines of an actor rehearsing for the most important performance of his life. This wasn't a simple conversation. It was a trial, an ambush, a reckoning decades in the making. On the coffee table, the whiskey bottle gleamed like a polished weapon. The folders, lab reports, bank statements, legal papers, photographs all lay in carefully chosen positions, each within reach like an arsenal of truth. I had turned my living room into a battlefield, every object a piece of ammunition for the final war between father and son. At 6:45, I walked the room once more. My steps measured my mind cold and steady, chairs positioned for confrontation, lighting adjusted for clarity, the whiskey set like a centerpiece of betrayal. Everything was perfect, surgical precise. Then 10 minutes early, twin beams of headlights cut across my front window. My chest tightened. Through the glass, I saw him, Melvin, stepping out of his BMW with the confidence of a man already spending an inheritance he hadn't yet claimed. He adjusted his suit jacket, his stride brisk, his expression smug. He was walking toward me, not as a son, but as an executioner who believed his victim was too weak to fight back. Perfect. I breathed, my hand tightening around the doorknob. I opened the door before he could knock. Melvin's smile was broad, his tone falsely warm. "Dad, you look good tonight," he said, as if trying to mask surprise. Perhaps he expected me to look frail, poisoned, already fading. Instead, I stood tall, stronger than he had ever seen me in years. "I feel better than I have in months, son," I answered evenly. "Come in, let's talk." He entered with the easy confidence of a man convinced of victory. He took the chair I had chosen for him, his posture casual, his briefcase resting against his leg. No doubt it held the legal papers. He hoped I'd sign documents that would drain my life's work into his greedy hands. "Thanks for calling, Dad. I'm glad you finally want to discuss the inheritance properly," he said, his eyes flickering across the room until they landed inevitably on the whiskey bottle. His smile widened. "Oh, we're definitely going to discuss inheritance tonight," I told him, my voice calm but loaded with weight. I reached for the bottle with deliberate care, as if lifting a relic. "But first, let's have a drink. I opened that lovely whiskey you gave me for my birthday." Satisfaction flared across his face. He leaned forward, hungry for the performance he thought was his to control. "That's perfect. It's good whiskey, isn't it? Top shelf quality." I poured 2 glasses slowly, the amber liquid catching the lamplight like molten gold, like sunset trapped in crystal. My hand never wavered. I handed him his glass and raised mine. "To family," I said, my eyes locked on him. "To family," he echoed eagerly. Not a flicker of hesitation, not a shadow of doubt. He raised the glass to his lips and drank deeply. One sip, then another. He closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the richness, certain he was watching his plan succeed. When he opened them again, I was staring at him not as a father, not as prey, but as judge and executioner. "How does it taste?" I asked softly. "The same whiskey you gave me 3 days ago." Something in my tone sliced through his confidence like a blade. The glass trembled in his hand. His smile collapsed. His skin went pale, his eyes darting to the bottle, then back to me. What he muttered, voice cracking. He slammed the glass down on the table, liquid splashing. "What are you talking about?" I leaned forward, my voice sharp and cold, every word precise as an engineer's calculation. "That whiskey you just drank with such pleasure, the one you doctored with benzoazepine derivatives, before gifting it to your 75-year-old father." His face drained of color. He clutched at his throat instinctively, panic flooding his eyes, a cornered animal, realizing the trap had sprung. You're insane. Why would you let me drink it?" "Relax, son," I said, my tone flat, clinical. "This is clean whiskey." I switched it out. His body jerked as if struck. He staggered to his feet, stumbling back a step, his back pressing against the wall. "Switched." "What do you mean, switched?" I reached without hurry for the manila folder resting beside my chair. The weight of it felt heavier than steel. I placed it on the table between us, like a judge slamming down the gavel. "This," I said quietly, "is what you've earned." "I know about the sedatives," I said, my voice steady as stone. From beside my chair, I lifted the manila folder like a judge raising a gavel. "The lab report makes it official. I spread the pages across the table, the crisp paper whispering like blades. Ohio Forensic Lab confirmed the whiskey was laced with benzodiazepine derivatives, enough to kill me slowly, quietly, so that everyone would believe it was just age catching up with me. Melvin's face froze. For a heartbeat, he was a man trying to deny reality. Then, without thinking, he muttered, "That's impossible." He wouldn't tell. And just like that, the slip of his tongue betrayed him. He cut himself off mid-sentence, but the damage was done. His own mouth had handed me the confession. "Roy saved my life," I said, the words hitting him like hammer blows. "Your son warned me. Unlike his father, he still has a conscience." Melvin staggered back as I laid down the second wave of ammunition. Neat stacks of financial records, receipts, bank transfers, decades of sacrifice made visible. I spread them out like evidence in a courtroom. 47 years I raised you. $200,000 in support over the decades. Food school debt bailouts chances. This is how you repay me. His face crumpled, shoulders sagging under the weight of truth. "Dad," he whispered, broken. Now I was desperate. The debts, the creditors. "So you decided to murder your father?" My voice was ice. I rose slowly from my chair, each inch deliberate like a skyscraper rising, while his world collapsed. Murder me and inherit everything in one clean stroke. No waiting for nature, no patience. Just greed in its purest form. Melvin shook his head violently. "It wasn't murder, it was acceleration. You're 75. People would have expected I cut him off, fury tightening my throat. Expected what, that sons poison their fathers when money gets tight? I pulled another document from the stack and slapped it onto the table. The sound cracked through the room like thunder. "This is my new will. Roy inherits everything. Irrevocable trust. Protected airtight. I jabbed a finger toward him, get nothing. Color drained from his face until he looked like a ghost. "What do you mean, nothing?" His voice trembled with desperation. "The house. Your savings. The retirement accounts." "All of it," I said. My voice didn't waver. "Every brick, every dollar, every memory goes to my grandson, the boy who saved my life from your poison." I walked to the front door, my steps echoing on the hardwood like a funeral march. With one motion, I flung it open, the night air rushing in. "You have 60 seconds to leave my house before I call the police. Attempted murder doesn't look good on a financial resume." Melvin stumbled forward, his polished shoes suddenly heavy. He looked at me with eyes I had once known as a boy's, pleading, hopeful, but now twisted with desperation. "Dad, please, don't do this. I'm your son." I met his gaze with a final, merciless truth. "You stopped being my son the day you tried to kill me." And with that, I closed the door. The click of the lock echoed through the house, final and absolute. Through the window, I watched him sit in his BMW. His head dropped into his hands. For long minutes, he stayed there, silhouetted by the dashboard, glow a man undone by greed and betrayal, before finally starting the engine. The taillights faded into the darkness, carrying him out of my life forever. Silence wrapped around me like a heavy cloak. I returned to the living room and poured myself a small glass of clean whiskey, the real whiskey. I lifted it toward the empty air. "To Roy," I said quietly, "and to justice." My phone buzzed on the table. Roy's name lit up the screen, followed by 3 simple words that warmed me more than the whiskey ever could: "Love you, Grandpa." Justice had been served. Family had been protected. The poison was gone, not just from the bottle, but from my bloodline. I raised my glass one final time to Martha's photograph on the mantel. Her kind eyes watched me through the frame, her smile eternal. She would have been proud of how it ended, not with violence, not with hatred, but with the protection of innocence and the condemnation of betrayal. The whiskey burned smooth and warm down my throat. Tonight it didn't taste of fear or suspicion. It tasted like resolution. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to D-Daily Stories, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.